Hi YouTube, my name is Eddie, also known as Paranormal Playwright, and as my name suggests, I like to write spooky plays. I recently started making online content because COVID has put my industry into a coma, though luckily I do still have a day job, and because I wanted an avenue to talk about horror, theater, and any combination of the two. I found I have a lot of things to say about both subject matters, and so here we are. If you've been watching or paying any attention to my other channel, Theater's Graveyard, you'll notice that I've been playing a lot of Dead by Daylight. It's a loving homage to icons and tropes of the horror genre that has become one of my favorite games to unwind with. When I started streaming, it was a no-brainer that DBD was going to become a cornerstone of my online content. Over on my Twitch channel, I've started a brand new profile in Dead by Daylight, and I've begun playing through the tomes as each of the respective characters and analyzing the lore as I unlock it. The intention is for each character's story to culminate in a VaatiVidya meets TV Skyen style video essay breaking down how the written lore, the gameplay, and the influence of the player base have come together to create the iconic characters that I love playing as. This is my first sort of talking head video. I wasn't really planning on making this kind of video, but there appears to have been some discourse in the Dead by Daylight community around the newest tome, and given my background in writing horror and that I'm trying to establish myself as a Dead by Daylight content creator, I figured I could chime in with some level of authority. One of the stories in the new tome that came out just a few weeks ago is focused on Sally Smithson, aka the Nurse, the infamous teleporting fiend that breaks all the game's mechanics when placed in the right hands, or wrong hands depending on your perspective. Given the huge impact this killer has had on gameplay, her exquisite Silent Hill inspired design, to say that a tome about her was well anticipated would be an understatement. However, upon reading the tome, which recently got leaked in full, apparently many players are outraged, accusing behavior of ableism and calling for whoever wrote the tome to be fired. The feedback has gotten so negative that I've even heard rumors that they're going to rewrite the tome altogether. Now, behavior has already had its fair share of ableism issues recently.
Alright JC, it's getting really boring just blabbing about colorblind all the time. We've heard it a million times, we know. If it gets done, it'll get done when we have time to do it, or if somebody decides that it's something that should be done.
As a neurodivergent person who considers myself to be a major advocate for disabilities, I'm literally an accessibility coordinator in my day job. And knowing the content of the nurse's initial backstory, I was extremely concerned, so I decided to skip ahead on my journey through the tomes and read the leaked excerpts for myself. I was shocked to find that there was nothing that I didn't really anticipate. Actually, I rather liked it. Well, liked is a relative term. This is horror after all, but I think that's sort of the crux of the issue. The story made me feel deeply uncomfortable. It really stirred up my own personal fears around mental hospitals and mental illness treatment. But I didn't feel like I wasn't supposed to feel that way, that was the incorrect response. In fact, it felt like that was a goal. It felt like a horror story, an honest to goodness horror story in a game about horror. What a surprise. I was really confused, to be honest, about what got people so upset, so I watched a video by Pixelbush Entertainment, another lore-focused Dead by Daylight content creator who was not happy about the Dead by Daylight lore, and I found myself in a deep disagreement with his points. Specifically, the following: that the intention behind Sally's original backstory is for the audience to view her as an emotionally sympathetic character, that the new lore ignores her sympathetic nature and assassinates her character by painting her as an ableist and a eugenicist, which contradicts the previous sympathetic nature. And that to paint a character as sympathetic and then turn around and reveal them to have abhorrent beliefs is somehow bad, both morally and in terms of quality of writing. At the center of my disagreement with Pixelbush's video is my belief that Sally is not meant to be a sympathetic character. I was so confused by his interpretation, since it seemed to be leaving out whole chunks of the story I had read, until last night on stream I realized that the backstory listed in the game proper is not the lore listed on the game's wiki, which was originally taken from the game manual page of the old Dead by Daylight website before it was revamped. This is a classic example of the "it's all there in the manual" trope, which is important to consider when you're analyzing the writing of a game like Dead by Daylight, where almost all of the specifics of the story are not going to be included in the actual gameplay, and you have to read supplemental materials to get it. It turns out, in-game, the lore of all the killers up to the pig is truncated and incomplete, and the full original text can only be found on the Wikipedia or on the Dead by Daylight website archives. The critical point missing from the game version of Sally's lore is that she experienced repeated abuse from the patients at the asylum she worked at. Over the years, her mind had reached its limits. 2 decades of seeing horrid things that violate the eyes, memories that are replayed every night, being abused verbally and physically by people without limits. And while it's not stated outright, there is some hinting that she views patients at Crotus Print Asylum as others. Sally saw insanity from the outside just to catch it herself. Regardless of the differences in the texts that Pixelbush was working off of and what I was reading, I think even the in-game version of the lore does a sufficient job to demonstrate that Sally Smithson is a morally reprehensible character who is not meant to be an audience surrogate in any means, and even if you do sympathize with her plight as a widow or maybe her abuse by the patients at the psych ward, she is still a psychiatric nurse with power over 50 disabled people in a time period when abuse of the disabled was infamously horrendous, who, quote, snaps and kills everyone in her care. If anything about this story is ableist, it's the trope of a sympathetic caretaker killing their neurodivergent wards because the stress just got to them. Her story is not like Philip Ojomo, also known as the Wraith, who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her backstory uses the term purification in the context of a miniature genocide. It really should come as no surprise that a character who would commit such acts is actually a eugenicist, especially in the time period in which Sally's story takes place. By depicting Sally as a reprehensible person, the new tome lore achieves several things. It bolsters her gameplay as one of the most oppressive killers in the game, and it removes any ambiguity in terms of behavior's viewpoint on whether or not Sally's actions were justified, and expressly states that no, they are not justified, Sally is evil and she always has been. One more argument of Pixelbush's I'd like to push back on is this idea that even depicting ableism and eugenics in the way that behavior does in the tome is harmful and shouldn't be done ever. And again, as a neurodivergent person myself, I have to disagree wholeheartedly. As a writer, I'm always hesitant to say whether X or Y things should or shouldn't be written. This is a tendency of mine shouldn't be mistaken for something like the cries of censorship from folks whose words, works, or actions cause demonstrable harm. But in terms of confronting an audience with the existences of harmful behaviors, not condoning them, but simply depicting them, especially in horror, it's not something that is an open and shut case. While I definitely believe there are certain acts that I don't need to see depicted any longer, things like slavery films and the bury your gays tropes, I find there to be power in for once depicting the able-bodied and mostly able-minded negligent caretaker of the mentally ill as monstrous, because it means that neurodivergent characters like Claudette get to play the heroes. I actually find the two stories, Claudette's 8th birthday, which I'm currently working through on Twitch, and The Cleansing of Clotis Pren, complement each other really nicely. And again, nicely is a relative term. This is horror after all. That's just my 2 cents on the whole situation. I really hope that the rumor of this story being completely rewritten is just a rumor. Anyways, if you liked my niche offering of Dead by Daylight lore analysis, leave a like and comment telling me what you thought about this whole thing. I just finished writing a video essay analyzing the first season of Marble Hornets, and I'll be releasing that next month, ideally. And then after that, I plan on focusing essays on the Entity, Claudette, and the Trapper. So if any of that sounds appealing to you, you make sure to hit that subscribe button. And remember, death is not an escape.